There we go.
Good morning, everyone. More participants are joining us. It's great. I'm expecting an attendance of almost 20 participants, so I'm really thrilled by the enthusiasm you have shown in this event, especially considering it's full holiday season, so we really appreciate it. Okay, we'll just give it a few more minutes until the rest join. I see we have with us Professor Rafael Montano, who was until a few weeks ago the chair of the department. Thank you. Good morning. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning. Oh, it's a pleasure.
Likewise. And Professor Okay, we're at 14 participants right now, and that's great. We'll just give it 2 more minutes until the rest join in. Until then, I will just proceed with the formalities. As I said, thank you everyone for joining this morning. It's full vacation season, and we really appreciate you taking the time to attend this event. I conceived it as a way to connect grad students in languages and literatures at Western, but not necessarily, with literary professionals such as Kagalina Orlov, who are active in the field and can perhaps help us explore publishing and literary translation as alternative career options matching our specialized training and skills. For those of you I haven't yet met, my name is Alexandra Irimia. I'm a PhD candidate in the Comparative Literature program at Western University in London, Ontario. And just a few months ago, I joined LTAC as a student member. LTAC is the Literary Translators Association of Canada, a very dynamic community that compiles a wealth of resources, very helpful for aspiring or emerging literary translators. Before we begin, the housekeeping rules are the usual. Just please keep your microphones muted if you're not speaking, just to help us reduce background noise. Feel free to write your questions or comments in the chat during the meeting. And if it's a question, please type the word question at the beginning to make it stand out and make my job easier at the end when I'll sort the questions and address them to Carolina. Also, I should say that this meeting is being recorded and you'll have the chance to go back to it or share it from the LTAC's YouTube channel and website. If you have any privacy concerns, be reassured that the recording is done in speaker view, which means that non-video participants won't have their image or their name show up in the recording at all. So simply turn your camera off and you will be off the records. The way this is going to be structured is a 30 to 35 minutes interview, followed by your questions from the audience. We'll try to address as many as possible in the last 20 minutes of this hour together. Also, I would like to acknowledge the institutional support I received from the Languages and Cultures Department, from both the program of Comparative Literature and the program of Hispanic Studies, in the Faculty of Arts and Humanities, in collaboration with LTAC, as I said, the Literary Translators Association of Canada, l'Association des traducteurs et traductrices littéraires du Canada. Special thanks go to Professor Constanța Burucua, Professor Ana Garcia-Allen, and Professor James Miller, who I see in the audience. Thank you very much for all your continued support in making this event possible and visible. That said, I would now like to introduce our guest, Dr. Kagalina Orlov. She's an author, a translator, and a scholar who has been working on research projects studying the literature, the politics, and the culture of contemporary Argentina. At the end of 2016, together with Sam McDowell, Carolina co-founded the Edinburgh-based Charco Press, which is an independent publishing house based in the UK, focused on the translation into English of contemporary Latin American literature. She acts as the director and the main editor at the press. Thank you, Carolina, for agreeing to meet with us today and share a bit of your experience.
Thank you, Alexandra, and thanks everybody who made it this morning, even though it's holiday time, so double appreciation there. And thank you for inviting me. I was just saying to Alexandra before we started that to me, it's not just an honor, but it's also a fantastic opportunity to bring together the worlds. We're going to talk about a bit the academic world and the I don't want to say the real world, but my own experience from having been part of the academic world for so long, and then now being a publisher. So I really cherish the opportunity of talking to students and lecturers and researchers. So thank you for having me.
Thank you. Meanwhile, I pasted in the chat some house rules and some useful links to institutions or organizations or people we will refer to during our meeting, just in case you want to find out more about them. You'll have the links at hand there. So let's just dive right in the questions, shall we?
Sure, yes.
Carolina, I will begin very abruptly by saying that for a number of reasons, from budget cuts to the scarcity and precarity of contracts, or even the pandemic, grad students in languages and literatures, like myself, are beginning to look more and more for career options outside the university, although their skills and training are highly specialized and often presented as hardly marketable. Of course, that's a myth. You too have gone through this experience as someone with an extensive background in teaching and research, who at some point decided to switch to cultural entrepreneurship on the international publishing market. So my question was, what would you advise the grad students in the audience who once aimed for professorships, teaching and doing research, and are now confronted with having maybe to consider other options? Would you recommend them to pursue careers in translation or publishing? And if so, what skills and experiences should they prioritize and cultivate to become successful in this field?
Thank you, Alexandra. Well, it's a very important question, I feel, and I feel a lot of responsibility answering. And of course, my answer is completely based on my own empirical knowledge, as it were. So maybe take it with a pinch of salt as an advice. But my own experience in a way gives me grounds to say that I jumped into this publishing career not something that I had always thought about. It was more something I arrived at from I guess two big factors. One was unemployment, so something that I guess you're already experiencing, maybe in different kind of levels, but that frustration of I had received my PhD, I was a postdoctoral researcher, and I spent almost 2 years looking for a job in academia in the UK, and I wasn't getting anywhere. And as I'm sure you all know, that expectations of you kind of publishing and researching and having, a book at least, and all these articles in your CV gets to be, that expectation gets to be higher and higher, at least from what I experienced in my own academic time, was increasingly more demanding to an extent that it becomes, once you're in that mode of mind, you don't realize how, or maybe you do, but I didn't realize how crazy and unfair that is, that you're producing all the time without a lot in those cases, without any funding or assurances of where the next funding is going to come from. So I spent almost 2 years in that kind of limbo of wanting to feeling the need to produce a lot to be at the level of other candidates, not having any money, and at the same time feeling very frustrated that all the knowledge that I felt I had acquired in all those years, because as you all know, it's years and years, I just couldn't put anywhere apart from these papers that I was expecting people were reading and were great in my CV, but this was the other factor. I felt an urge to feel that I was making an impact somewhere, which I think a lot of academics, or at least in my experience, coming from humanities and languages, sometimes we struggle with that. I'll just refer to myself, but I did feel that struggle of, is this useful for, for anyone, for anything, for the world? So combining, those two factors, a real kind of economic factor of unemployment, of not going anywhere, of feeling that I wasn't going to get anywhere, and then the necessity to try and put all that knowledge somewhere, made us think of some also my partner, and we just said, well, there has to be something. There has to be something where this knowledge can be put to the world. I'm from Argentina, as you said, and I've been living in the UK. I have been living in the UK for more than half of my life. So that kind of coming and going of cultures and understanding of markets, if you want, or readerships, is something that I also have as experience, and that also filtered in when trying to come up with an idea of, well, what do I do? So that was a long-winded explanation to say, on one hand, as a translator myself, it's a very tricky kind of scenario, very tricky circle to get into, and that's something that from Charco we're also trying to address, because I've always felt, just going to the books by Latin American authors, that the translators were always the same and had been for decades. So I don't want to give you, an impression, an unrealistic impression. It's a very hard circle to break into, and then once you break into, it's a very kind of unstable, situation in terms of financing, because you just earn your living with each project. There's nothing reliably, certain in that sense. As in, that's also from experience. So, if I think a career as a translator is possible, but it would take a long time for you to make it, or to just live on being a literary translator. You could be a translator that can specialize in literature or research, even academic articles, and have literary translation as something that you build on, but maybe depend on something else for your salary, as it were. It's going to take time. And publishing, I think publishing is an interesting industry that, in terms of always thinking of literary translation or literature in translation, it's a field that is growing, I think slowly but surely, and is growing in a very interesting way. This is speaking also from my very short experience as a publisher, 5 years. So I think I would hope there's a lot of interesting opportunities that would emerge within that field, over there in Canada and in the US, over here. But again, I think we're all used to things being tricky, or bits by bits. You have to get some experience within one field in publishing, and then build your CV or your career like that. But I think certainly it's a field that is growing, and that would provide interesting opportunities for graduates.
Thank you. That's a very insightful and empathetic response, I find. A lot of, while staying realistic, of course, and encouraging for some of us. And in fact, it ties nicely with my next question, because you are active on a global level in the book industry. You work with South American authors, but you're based in the UK and you sell books internationally. I suspect, but correct me if I'm wrong, that your major, most of your clients are based in Europe or the US. It has always been a difficult environment, as you say, for independent presses, all the more so for those publishing only fiction like you do, and perhaps the most difficult of all for those specialized in translations, because I know there was a statistic a few years ago mentioning that translations have a very, very small market share. Only about 3% of what gets published in the States, for example, are translations. So you were mentioning a bit of some of the trends that have been emerging lately. And I was wondering what these trends are, maybe a bit more specifically, and if you noticed anything in particular during the past year. I imagine the pandemic has changed a lot in your field, as it has done in all of them, I think. And finally, what do you wish you'd had known 5 years ago when you co-founded the press and you know now after accumulating this experience?
Thank you, Alexandra. Well, I'll try. You remind me if I go off track. I think, yeah, the scenario of literature in translation, it's quite dire if one gets kind of realistic or pessimistic, in the sense that very, 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 very little gets to be, I don't want to say translated, because I think a lot of things do get translated, but they just don't get published. I think there's a lot of, trying back to the previous question, there's a lot of very good, eager, passionate translators out there that also work very hard to push new voices into the English-speaking world, which is the world I can speak of as a publisher. But they just don't make it to the interest of publishers. And I think that's changing very slowly, too slowly for my liking, but at least it's changing. I think, I'm not sure why. I've got my own hypotheses, but I think slowly, I don't actually, I'd love to know how it is in Canada, but my feeling here, or my understanding here, is that people seem to be quite intimidated to an extent by all things that have been translated, not just in literature, but also in films, for example, if they're subtitled. There's a misconception that because there's an intervention there of a translator or a subtitler, or translator and subtitler, that the quality, there's some loss in the quality, or on one hand, or because something has been translated, I get this a lot, means that it's harder, it's a more difficult novel, it's niche, it's darker, I don't know. There's certainly very deep-rooted, in my understanding, misconception of things that have been translated. And so that's, our everyday challenge. It's a bit kind of underlying. There's that preconcept that we have to break through. We know our selling point is that we do contemporary Latin American literature, but at the same time, we try to keep that very quiet, which doesn't mean we don't give visibility to the translators, which we can talk about later. But we want to bring to the readers and to the English-speaking world in general that what we're doing is offering this variety of very interesting voices, very good novels or short stories that, need to be on the shelves. We're not even we're trying not to push people to buy them, but we feel that there's been a lack of this variety of voices for too long, and that in general, not just from Latin America, and that in general, speaking of translated fiction, right, and that the options need to be there, not just in the bookshops, but in the corpuses of academic courses, in the libraries. So I think little by little, people are, daring to have a go. And I can sense that even, in the last 5 years, I think readers are trying things out a bit more. And that, in that sense, it is changing, and people are buying more translated fiction, I think, buying and reading. I've forgotten about your second question. Let me think. What was it?
It was about what you wish you'd known at the beginning that you know
yes.
now.
Oh, yes. Thank you. I don't know, actually. I think obviously there's a lot of things I don't know yet, but maybe I haven't. I can't think of that in comparison to 5 years ago. I knew I didn't know anything, so when we started, it was maybe a blessing because we actually did what we didn't, because we didn't know how it would go. We just did it, and we were very lucky, I always say, to be based here in Scotland as opposed to London or England, or maybe New York even, because it's a very small community in general, as a city or as a country, and then as a city, and then within that small literary community, there's a lot of support. So we were very lucky to be known very quickly here within the literary community of Scotland, and then in the UK in general. So I think we grew a lot quicker than I had anticipated in terms of people in the industry getting to know us, and I'm diverting here, but I don't know. Maybe I wish I'd known how much work there's involved, because I don't feel I've stopped in 5 years. But it's not a complaint. It comes back to your initial question that, in a way, incited me and inspired me to start a publishing house. I think there's so much work to do, that and so much material to hand out there, and so many translators to work with, and so many new ideas to try so as to get the literature out there, that it's never ending. But so I didn't know that, really. Maybe I hadn't thought of that. But yes, in a nutshell, I think it's the trend's changing for good, in a good way.
Thank you. And I have to say that your work is particularly important, and the work of people like you, for us as comparatists, because our research projects often follow the international circulation of works and themes, and without translated literature and without keeping it up to date for contemporary titles, our work would not be possible, or it would be severely limited to past creations. So I realized I prepared a lot of questions. I'm not sure if I will be able to address them all, so I'll skip to the most important ones. I was thrilled to discover that you collaborated with LTAC members before, having co-translated with Sarah Moses a book called Die My Love, a book by Ariana Harwitz, which gained a lot of critical acclaim in 2017 and was even longlisted for Man Booker International, if I'm not mistaken. And the circumstances in which we met a few months ago speak also of the international prestige that Charco enjoys. It was an asymptote virtual event around the title you just published this year, the wonderful short story collection, A Perfect Cemetery by Argentine author Federico Falco, and that one was translated by a superstar in the world of literary translation nowadays, Jennifer Croft, an International Booker Prize Award winner. So 2 names that are very, very reputed in their fields. And I was wondering, when such high levels of prestige aren't obvious from the beginning of a project, how do you decide what gets translated and what doesn't? How do you choose your titles, your authors, and your translators at the press? Thank you. I know that's a huge question.
No, I just hope I'm not talking too much or boring the audience.
Not at all.
Good. No, thank you. They're great questions, and I hope I can bring some useful insight to you all. Yes, I've got just to show you. We can put the details on the chat later, but that's the book you first mentioned that I co-translated with Sarah Moses, and the book by Falco. It's handy that my office is so small in my house. That's the book you just mentioned. Very interesting stories to tell you. The Harwicks one, this one, I have to say that I had read her books prior to starting Charco, and I was very drawn by her. Thank you, by her style. She's got a very unusual style of writing. It's very it's like a roller coaster. You really go up and down in her rhythm, and in that going up and down, you go through a lot of emotions. It's a very intense reading experience. All her work, and just a confession, I wanted to publish her because I thought this is great. Someone out there has to read it, and I didn't think many readers would actually like the book. We did a very small print run for that book because I did think that within the books that we had in mind, that was particularly challenging, and I was proven wrong very quickly, which also gave me as the publishing editor a lot of hope, because I thought, okay, well, maybe I've been underestimating the readers, and even though there's a shyness towards literature in translation, there's also a lot of readers out there who are ready for anything. So that was a surprise for us. It did much better. Well, indeed, it was longlisted for the Booker International, which, for those who don't know, it's a huge deal, not just in terms of publicity or visibility, but also as a small publisher, the levels of change or increase in sales is even if it's just long listed, it's very, very, before and after. So I didn't know that before this happened to us, so that I share that with you. And if you're a very big corporate publisher, it might not make any impact, but for us who are always trying to get funding and struggling and counting the pennies, as it were, when this kind of showcasing of one of our books happens, it really has a huge impact, and for the authors as well and the translators. So I think for Sarah Moses, this was I don't know if this was her first book. I want to say that it was, but I'm not sure. But I know that certainly a lot of work came from that long listing, which makes me very happy. And sorry, this was a long-winded answer. But yeah, with Jennifer Croft, it's one of the ideas also that inspires me, at least when I'm thinking of what to publish and who is going to be that translator. And this did come from my years in academia, was to try and break the canon, as it were. And I'm sure maybe you all deal with that all the time in different fields within our compared shared field. And yes, it's very stifling, I feel sometimes, now that there's a canon and we all study the same authors because they mean these things. And so I don't expect our books to form other canons, but I do like the idea or the illusion to know that the canon at least needs to be questioned. And for me, that also has to do with the translators. As I was saying, earlier, I felt that it was very suspicious that, the 2 or 3 translators that I knew, speaking from my experience of Latin American literature, were always the same. So we try to work with emerging translators, give them the first chance to work on a book, and at the same time work with the superstars, like you just said, like Jennifer Croft or Megan McDowell, or Daniel Hahn. He's also very well known here. And it's great to be talking about superstar translators. I didn't think that was a concept 5 years ago even, but that's just superstars. And so, and when we work with a superstar translator, let's call them like that, I always try and pair them up with an emerging translator as a copy editor. We tend to work with translators when it comes to copy editing, as in correcting the book, and we're very meticulous, and we always compare the translation back to the original, something that I don't believe happens a lot with other publishers. They just read the translation, make sure it reads well in English, and that's it. But we always go back to the original and make sure we didn't miss anything, or make sure the humor is transposed and the nuances. It's an endless task, of course, but we try our best to check. And so now that I'm telling you that, I guess without realizing or thinking about it much, we try and promote that kind of learning experience for an emerging translator. In the case of Jennifer Croft, it was Ellen Jones, who was just starting, and she was like, no way, no, that I can't possibly, I'll have nothing to say to Jennifer Croft. And Jennifer Croft, this is all I get, what can be recorded, doesn't matter. But she said, this was one of my best experiences ever. I had never worked with a copy editor that was so brilliant. And I just think that's wonderful. I think that all shows at the end of the day in the book that you read I just think it all goes through the final translation there. And so just to sum up your other part of the question, which was how I choose books, it's a very fluid process for me. I'm all the time reading not just books, but also I read the newspapers. I've always done, and I read what authors that interest me, what they mention that they're reading. I read about literature festivals everywhere, like who are they inviting, why, what have they published. So I love that kind of the intricacies of what a book does, and in terms of the impact it has, and why are people talking about a certain book or a certain author, or what a certain author is talking about. And yes, so it's kind of a long-winded, sometimes very intuitive journey for me. Yes.
Thank you. And I think the model of mentorship you just mentioned between more experienced and less experienced translators is such an incredible thing to do, to encourage aspiring people to gain experience while having this hands-on collaboration with someone who has done it before successfully. You mentioned Daniel Hahn, and although this wasn't my next question, I will skip right through it because I think it's important for our participants to know that your press has also hosted on its website a translation diary written by Daniel Hahn as he translated one of your titles, from the moment he signed a contract to the moment he submitted the manuscript for a first read with the copy editors and the other editors. So he describes in very, very much detail and in a very witty way, I find all the ups and downs and the emotional roller coaster involved in translating a work, a literary work he was reading for the first time as he translated. It's, I think it's not published yet, but it's scheduled in your catalog in the coming months. It's Never Did the Fire by Diamela LTAC. I included a link in the chat for those who want to read this diary and to see if this kind of work with all its intricacies is or is not for them as a career option. I find that very, very instructive, and I really appreciated the generosity of the press in making their translator so visible and really highlighting all the effort that goes into a translation. Also, at the end of A Perfect Cemetery, you make room for a translator note, a very beautiful one, in which Jennifer Croft explains not only some of her word choices, but also her own approach to literary translation. And I don't know of other presses that offer so much space and visibility to their translators. So I was wondering what motivates you to do it, and how do you plan to continue doing it in the future?
Thank you, Alexandra. I shall pass those compliments to both Danny and to Jennifer. Thank you. Yes, it's you know, perhaps slightly like I was saying to you all before about our selling point being that we publish Latin American literature, but we try to try and not mention that so often. In the same way, we always had to think. In fact, probably at the very beginning, we were recommended that we don't specify that this is a book that's been translated for the reasons I was telling you before. But at the same time, I think translation, it's an art, and the translators community is also changing, and it's growing, and naturally so is gaining visibility. By the very fact that we, like we just said, we can now speak of superstar translators, and that international prizes are recognizing their work and they're splitting the prize, half. I think it's fantastic, and I could not work towards that too. I could not give visibility and protagonism to our translators because of course, there's the author and there's the original, but without the translators, these books, literature would not travel. And it seems contradictory because I get very angry and frustrated at this concept of literature in translation, because I don't know what your all kind of different experiences and backgrounds are in that sense, your literature background. But when I grew up in Argentina, it was just literature, right? So maybe you had, when you went to the bookshop, a section of, in my case, Argentinian literature, but the rest was just, mixed in alphabetical order, or maybe, genres within literature. But there was no distinction between literature that had been translated. And I grew up with that concept. I realize now, even as a child, you read books that a lot of them, in my case, had been translated. So to try and enter into literature, understanding that there's two, literature and there's literature in translation, to me is very, it's very against what I think literature is and should be, or how a reader should enter that world of fiction. So that sometimes stands perhaps in contradiction to the fact of you need to give visibility to the translators. But I think we just need to give visibility to the fact that there are a lot of, good books and good stories and good authors and good translators out there. And the problem, I think, if you want to call it the problem, lies elsewhere. I don't think it's giving or not visibility to the author. It's just thinking about literature from a very early age in a different way. it's a way of thinking about the world, I think. But that's a completely different class we can talk about. But what you mentioned, I'm sure I didn't get the concept right, but the bibliomigrancy, the books traveling and ideas traveling and culture traveling. But to me, that's what's about. It's not whether a book has been translated and therefore it's going to be in a side, part of the bookshop or library that I'm never going to go because I'm of a mindset. That to me needs to be broken. I mean, I know that sounds very idealistic, and translators are, at the forefront of that. They're so what drives us, that will to change that will to bring a culture into another culture and foment and promote that exchange. So as much as I can, translators will always have all the visibility they can on the book, on our website, on the events we do, because a lot of the times we can't, pre-pandemic situation, we couldn't bring our authors over to the UK. A lot of the times we did launch events with the translator, and the translators, a lot of the time, I never spoken to readers, so it's a changing experience for all of them, and including myself. So yes, we are very much, promoters of giving visibilities to the translators and everybody involved in making a book happen.
Yeah, thank you. My question was longer, contrasting that with Lawrence Venuti's concept of the invisibility of the translator and all its ramifications, but I won't insist with that right now, simply because it's 10:41, so we have technically entered the section dedicated to questions from the audience. So please feel free to write in the chat your questions or raise your hand if you want to address one directly. I think our reduced number will allow us to interact directly as well. Until anyone, I see we have a question. I don't see the name, it just says iPhone guest, but feel free to intervene, iPhone guest.
Hello, give me 1 second. I'm Emilio, by the way. I'm trying to turn on my video, but I think it's not working. Give me 1 second.
Don't worry, please. Yeah, just...
Perhaps we can continue with another one, if you don't mind.
Okay, sure. Until other volunteers appear, I was just... Oh, Victoria, please go ahead.
Hi there. First and foremost, thank you very much, Alexandra and Carolina, for making this time. And I wanted to ask a question to Carolina. I actually wrote a question before, but Alexandra already asked it, so I'm going to modify it a bit. In the magazine Lengua by Random House, you were recently speaking about this questionable new Latin American boom by women authors. And my question originally was, how do you select the works that you translate at Charco? But my question now, given that Alexandra just mentioned that they're translating Diamela, do you just look for recent gems to translate, or you also look for hidden gems in the past that may not have had the publicity, the translation that you think they deserve?
Thank you, Victoria.
Yes, thank you, Victoria. It's a great question. I should go back and read that article because I don't know what was published of everything I said to Leila, which is great conversation. Yes, no, both. I feel very limited, very constrained at the kind of the production size that we have. We only publish at the moment 6 to 7 books a year. But you can imagine from everything that I've been telling you that I wish we could be doing 50 books a year, because there's so much out there that, as you said, Victoria, has been hidden, or not hidden, but unrecognized on many different levels. On one level, within the national constraints of of each countries and within each country as well. But publishing possibilities, in a country like Peru, for example, I know for a woman, for example, and this I was told this by one of our forthcoming Peruvian women authors. She found it extremely hard to break through so many hurdles just because she was a woman, a young woman in Peru, where generalizing the publishing industry is still very small and very male dominated. So just to give you an example of a contemporary scenario. So there's hidden gems, as it were, like that, because in this case, I'm talking about Katia Dawi. She made it, she got someone's attention and she got published, but, along the way, of course, there's so many that will hopefully it'll take longer. It won't mean that they just never be published, but it will take longer for them to publish. So I do, that's why I was saying to you earlier that I don't just sit and wait to see what gets published or what gets awards or what gets, critical acclaim. I try and go to the previous steps or indeed to the side of those things, because prices are also, completely arbitrary for good and for bad, but they're arbitrary because, there's so many factors there. And yes, to the other part of your question, yes, I also, I'm dying. I'm very enthusiastic about swimming back into the ocean, as it were, and bring back those authors that were, for so many different reasons, left untranslated into English, which seems crazy. Indeed, one of the books we're about to publish in October, I think, or November, is Ida Vitale, who's, I think she's won all the recognitions, international recognitions there are in the Spanish-speaking world for her work and her career. She's from Uruguay. She's 97. She's mostly a poet, but she's also written prose, and there's been a couple of very small anthologies of her work had been translated into English, but nothing else. So we're bringing some of her prose into English. And again, with LTAC, she's Premio Nacional in Chile, and she's, this iconic figure. And she had, I think, a couple of books translated by small university publishers that, they don't have that same impetus as we would have to try and push the book as much as possible. Again, not for us, it's not solely an idea of or a motivation that has to do with marketing, but also of, as I was saying to you before, of getting the books out there, that they're there as part of all the other books, that they're there for the readers to see. So yes, it's yes to both those questions.
Thank you.
As much as I can.
Yeah, I see Halim, if I remember correctly, the name, it has his video on. So maybe you'd like to ask your question now before we address Miguel's in the chat.
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much, Irina. Yeah, and I find that hearing an editor, it's a really interesting opportunity, because the work you do really requires understanding your work from a business perspective, as well as from a cultural or more like literary perspective. So Carolina, the type of question that I have, it's related to, because Charco's business and literary proposition, it's very focused on diversity of voices, yeah, of course, especially from Latin America. And for example, one detail that I found really interesting from your project are the book bundles that you use, that, for example, you bundle together, you make like a combo of different books that perhaps have a common theme. And then you add like a title, just like to tease readers to read these books, and to, especially with these kind of expressions that really push like this idea of challenging the reader to find something new, something diverse. So the type of question that I have, it's still really open, is that I would really like to know more about like all of these challenges or your own strategies for navigating these complex scenario of these dimensions of your work, of the business side as well as the literary side. So it's just like, if you, I really would like to know more about like the business side in combination with your literary proposition. Thank you, Carolina.
My pleasure. Thank you. That's a very useful question, I think. Well, I think the first idea that I would share with you relates back to what I was just saying about what I feel is a limitation in the amounts of books we can produce a year. And you tell me if I'm not going the kind of the way you're expecting. I'll rephrase that. You tell me if you wanted a more kind of business-centered question. Emilia, right? Is your name?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So because we're so small and our production team is tiny, and we do everything here in terms of, or here in our office home, but also we print in the UK, and we try to keep everything local as much as possible. That has an impact on cost, of course, and in turn on the amount of books we can produce a year. That might sound as a disadvantage, or I make it sound as a disadvantage because I think there's so much material to be put out there. But in fact, it's one of our great advantages, because we are so we work so closely with each book, as I was saying to you earlier. We're very meticulous with the translation process, with the correction, with the design of the book. I can tell you a bit about that. And there's a lot of responsibility as well, because a lot of the times some of the authors we bring out have never been published into English before, and this English still opens the doors to other languages, which is something I learned in my short experience as a publisher. I thought Spanish was Spanish, and I didn't think this of Portuguese, but I certainly thought Spanish was an autonomous language, in the sense that if you come from the Arabic publishing industry or the Chinese, you would go straight into Spanish, but that's not the case. I know editors from China and from Egypt, for example, and they just wait for the books to be translated into English and see what happens to the book in English before they notice anything. So that brings a lot of responsibility. I take it as a responsibility to make sure that voice that we're going to publish for the first time is as true as it can be to the original, so that the journey can then happen as fair as possible to that author and to the universe that author wants to present. So the business model is small. But very, very, we're very close. I think, we're very on top of each project. And if maybe this is not a business, well, I don't know. You can tell I'm not from a business background, but we have lost money in the process of, when a translation hasn't been right, we've started again twice already. We're learning, and that's probably, not a good business step to take, but in the long run, I think that's going to show in terms of, again, of the quality of the things we produce consistently. So what else can I tell you that would be useful? I think you can be as specific as you want.
Yeah, I know there are many more questions, but perhaps just like a small follow-up question for me is, I find that part of the local scale of your business really interesting, and it really makes sense. And I also noticed that you also have distributors all around the world, even in Australia. So that's a big distance. And I also noticed that you are even offering to cover some part of the shipping costs, if I'm correct. And I think that's a very unique proposal, or unique, because of course it will cost you money, but perhaps it may make sense in many ways for you to assume those costs, so perhaps if you could talk a little bit of that. And like another aspect that you may or may not include, as you prefer, is in a way you're talking about perhaps, I'm not sure if your audience of readers, it's a niche. So for me, I think it's really challenging or difficult to understand how are you able to get in touch and get some feedback of this niche audience that at the same time may be located all across the world. So that's at least my impression. So, but yeah, thank you so much for your answer.
No, my pleasure. No, great questions. Yes, the distribution, it's an interesting something we had to weigh in, because we started distributing our books in the US and Canada last year, or the pandemic has made all, anyway, not so long ago, because we think the publishing industry within the English-speaking world is not the publishing industry, but when you publish a book in English nowadays, you know, in the 21st century, with all the platforms out there that facilitate you getting to a book, we think it makes sense for one book to be available anywhere really within the English-speaking world, if that's possible. We don't, up to now, if you speak to an agent, this is going very kind of into the kind of the invisible parts of when a book gets acquired and translated and published. But a lot of the agents, when they try to sell the rights for a book to be translated into English, up to now, or well, still now, they would want to break territory. So they would want to give you, if you're a publisher, US and Canada, and they would want to maybe give the UK to someone else, and the Commonwealth, or sorry, the rest of Commonwealth except North America, or Australasia to another one. So they want to, you know, split the market. But when we started, we said, well, that won't make any sense. I mean, it doesn't make sense now, and it will make less sense in 10 years or 5 years down the line. So from the onset, we tried to stick to our guns and say, well, we're just buying world English rights. And a lot of the agents still don't want to do that, but we feel it's the way to go. And so, you know, coherently with that idea, we started distributing our books in North America. And we ship our books from here because it's actually cheaper to produce our books in the UK and to make all one edition, you know, one print run of the same book. We also get to check the quality because anyway, it gets very detailed, and you can send me an email if you want more details later, and I'm happy to share them. But it turns out it's cheaper for us to make the books all here in Cornwall. Actually, we print them and then they get shipped into the US and Canada, and then they get distributed within the US and Canada by our distributors there. And the same with Australia and New Zealand, a smaller market, but it's the same there. And in terms of your other part of the question, I mean, that's also changing very rapidly. I think the how a book, you know, the word of mouth. We, even 5 years when we started, we were just doing everything we could and paying money that we couldn't afford to, you know, to a PR to get the books to the broadsheets, and we just thought we need to get to the broadsheets, and that's, you know, it's still important, but it's not where it always happens. You know, we have we pay attention to bloggers and to Instagrammers and reviewers that take again different ways to talk about a book. You know, YouTubers, and you know, that's one of the advantages I think of our current moment, is that a book also, you know, we can send an ebook to Sri Lanka, and that gets read at the same time as the book in Canada, and conversations happen. And so that's been that we've had a lot of support from readers through kind of platforms like that don't wait for a broadsheet review. They just want to get their hands on the book and spread the word.
Thank you. Very insightful and a bit technical details. I hope that's useful to at least some in the audience. we have two questions from Miguel Antonio Chavez. I see his first one is about translating into the myth of being able to translate truly only into your native language and how you're dealing with that, translating from Spanish into English. And his bonus question, I will just read it because I haven't had the time to process it. Comparing to a mainstream multinational publishing house, what would the main difference be when an indie publishing house goes into the process of translating a novel, from contract details to the timelines? Thank you, Miguel.
Thank you, Miguel. What was the first question? I've forgotten already. Sorry.
It's in the chat. It's about translating into another
yes,
language.
Yes. Thank you, Alexandra. Sorry. Yes. I did also study translation. They did tell me that as well. I don't know. I think every translator has a baggage of experience that varies from translator to translator, and an experience of language or languages that that escapes axioms like that. In my own experience, I would never feel that I could do justice to a voice if I don't co-translate, speaking from Spanish to English. That's why I've co-translated a few of our books, but I couldn't live with myself if I just leave it at my English. I just need it. I think it's worked very well in the books I've done with Sarah Moses and Annie McDermott and Fionn Petch, because and they've all been Argentinian authors, because I think I can certainly bring into the draft of the this is how we do it. The co-translations are, a topic in itself, but the way we've done it is that I bring into my draft of the English version everything that I can extract from the Argentinian, and this is something Jennifer Croft also talks about, the idea that herself, when she translates from Spanish, she only translates from Argentinian authors because she's lived there, and she would feel confident only translating Argentinian authors. And it's a very controversial concept, I think, but I think one I share, in the sense that, at least with Spanish, but it's like that with any language, I think, or at least the language that gets spoken in so many countries and regions. There's so many levels of differences, of nuances, of ways of saying something that can be rude in one place and can be funny in the other place. And so the way I've worked with co-translators is that I can bring all those aspects into my English, and then the co-translators whose mother is English then work through that, and then we produce something that we can call a co-translation. But I wouldn't feel confident, or I wouldn't feel that I'm doing a full job to just translate into English. So I guess I'm sticking to the to the rule, as it were. And the other question I've also forgotten. I'll see the chat for Alexandra.
It was about the differences between an indie publishing house and a larger.
Yes, thank you. Well, I don't know, because I've never worked in a mega corporation. I know this I know from authors, so from authors that have had books published in corporations and then work with us, and because they're corporations, there's a lot of money involved that is always very useful and very tempting when you're signing a contract as an author, especially in Latin America, in the sense that authors are not generally recognized as workers, so this writing just happens in the in-betweens of 3 or 4 different jobs. I'm sure we can generalize that to a lot of societies, but at least, for example, in the UK, the authors I think are more are better looked after. And that's not the case in Latin America. So when a big offer comes in with a big check for a novel from a corporation, I think it's understandable that they accept, but then nothing happens to the book. This is generalizing, but to give you an insight as well. A lot of the times a corporation wants to hog a name, get their work, get their 5 books, and they get promised, to give you an example, they get promised all of the Spanish-speaking world, so not just Latin America, but also Spain. And then, when you say, send your little spies out to, if you're in Mexico and you want someone to go and check the bookshop in Madrid or a bookshop in Santiago de Chile, the books are never there. So, so the complaint or the big difference I know is that a corporation might, give you a big check for your book and maybe have a big marketing campaign in one sector or one region that we could never afford. But then there's no careful process that accompanies the production of the work, if that makes sense, in the sense of really making sure that, for instance, the cover of the book replicates something that the author wants to see there. If they want to add, an author's note, they can add it. There's an approachability, I guess, all this long explanation to say. A difference would be, in my understanding, that in a corporation, and this is not just in the literature world, as we all know, it's very hard to talk to someone in particular who would hold themselves accountable for what they're going to do with that information. Whereas in an independent publisher, at least, speaking from my experience, the author can come to me, the translator can come to me, and we just try and solve the problem or try and, fulfill the wishes. Or and we want the book to do well. We as people, want to accompany the book as not just as a product, but as an object that can make an impact somewhere. So that passion, I guess, is not, really reproduced in the bigger publishers.
Thank you very much, Carolina, for your answers, for your
My pleasure.
enthusiasm.
My pleasure.
Any final questions? If anyone else wants to intervene, now it's the time. We are nearing the end of our time together, but if there is one more curiosity, we can probably answer to. It's welcome. If not, just because I don't want to keep you for longer than promised, I would just like, before we conclude, to thank Kagalina again for her very generous answers and for agreeing to share so sincerely from her experience. And I also want to thank our partners, LTAC and the Department of Languages and Cultures at Western, and all the faculty I mentioned at the beginning of our meeting. And not least, thanks to all of you, the participants, for your questions and for taking the time to be with us today. It was truly a pleasure, and I hope these conversations can continue in the future. So if there are no other questions for now, thank you all. I hope you stay well and enjoy the rest of your summer. Take care.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks for having me here and for the space and for the questions. And any doubts, I'm sure Alexandra can share my email if anybody wants to follow up with anything. I'm at your disposal. So thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Carolina. That's, again, very generous of you. I know you're very, very busy with your daily many roles, so we appreciate that.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Thanks to you all, and have a good rest of the holiday. Have a holiday.
Bye. I will share the link once the video is uploaded on the LTAC YouTube channel with all those interested, so you can always go back and revisit this conversation. Thank you. Goodbye.